Howdy, Lark and Rose here. Time for the next keyboard lesson. I've lost count of how many there are, so whatever. So today we're going to learn about thirds and fifths and seconds and fourths in a chord, because we're going to start to get into what melodies do and what notes do and don't go with the chord. Like I said, the notes in a chord, here's a C major. The notes in a chord always go with the chord. They're part of the chord, all the way up and down the whole keyboard. They always fit. But there are other notes. But you need to know what they're called, so there's a way to describe them. So I'm going to teach you the convention of what they're called, even though the naming conventions are stupid. And I complain about them. For example, in a scale, there are 12 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Then there's the octave. So you'd think that this might be called a second and a third and a fourth and a fifth and a sixth, and that would actually make sense, but that's not how they're named. So I will show you how they're named. In a normal chord, remember, the major is skip 3, skip 2, minor is skip 2, skip 3. So here's C major, here's C minor. The top note's the same, bottom note's the same, only the middle one changes. Okay, so in a C major, the note that the chord is named after, in this case C, is called the root note. You could call it the first, but nobody calls it that. It's called the root note. Now from there, this counts as a third, as in 1, 2, 3. Now, you may notice, wait, you skip these ones. Yeah, I'll get to that in a minute. It's just their stupid naming convention. So in every normal chord, major or minor, you have the root note, the third, and the fifth that make up the chord. Now, there's a minor third. This is known as the minor third. And this is the major third. Either way, they're referred to as the third. Because you picture these 5 notes. And you just ignore those for the time being, because that's how they decided to name it. And I can get into the history of why that is, but it really isn't worth the effort. It's really weird of people figuring out intonations and semitones and ratios between different notes, making different sounds and stuff. So I'm just going to teach you how they're named. The fact that it doesn't exactly make sense, you can just deal with it. So in every normal chord, major or minor, you're playing the first and the third and the fifth. Now, the one in between the first and the third is, not surprisingly, the second. And that's a thing that almost always will fit with the chord as far as a melody wandering around. The fourth is between the third and the fifth. Again, root note, second, third, fourth, fifth. The third and the fifth, with the root, make the original chord. The other notes can be used in a melody. For example, this will be a shocker for all of you. Okay, notice the song is idiotic. I'm not using this song because it's such an awesome piece to play. I'm using it to point out how melodies work. So here we have C major. Mary Had a Little Lamb is third, second, first, second, third, 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 second, 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 third, fifth, fifth. Notice most of the notes are in the chord, except that it includes that too. And melodies will often do that, where mostly they're hanging around the notes in the chord, but they'll do other things in between. Now, keep in mind what I said before, which is that every single rule I can tell you about is going to be broken in music. But you have to learn the rules first to know how to break them. For example, I'll give an example of a thing I was writing recently that intentionally the melody isn't mainly on the notes in the chord. So here's an A major. There's an A. There's the third. There's the fifth. There's the octave. Now, the octave as in octopus, 8. So that's second, third, fourth, fifth. I'll make it major. Fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth. But the eighth is just the octave. It's an A again. So the reason an octave is called an octave is because it's the eighth. So you have the root note, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth, and seventh, and then you're into a new octave. Now, sometimes they talk about the ninth of a chord, which is just the second, but up an octave. Sometimes they even talk about the 11th, which is the fourth, but up an octave. So that's just another weird thing they do with the naming conventions. Like, why didn't you just call it the second in the next octave? Why would you call it a ninth? But they do, just so you know that. So here's an A major, and I don't even remember what I was making this up for. So that's on a C major. So the first two chords are A major and C major. Notice how many of the notes aren't in the chord and how many are. I mean, this is just an example. You don't have to learn this. So it starts on the second, which is the B, and then the third and the fifth, which are in the chord. And then it jumps to this second, or ninth if you want to call it that, and then back to the A. So these notes in the melody are in the chord, but it also adds this and goes. And then in a C major, it does what's called a sharp fourth, the Lydian fourth. Doesn't matter if you know it's called that, which has a weird spooky sound to it. But it actually hits on the wrong note. Notice, here's the C major. That is not in a C major. It's the sharp fourth. But then it goes right back to the G, which is in the chord. And goes to the E, which is also in the chord. Now, you'll hear there are things, the second and the fourth, when you play a chord and you're not playing the third, you're not playing it the normal way, but instead of a third, it has the second, or it has the fourth. Those are often called a suspended second or a suspended fourth. I know some people object to this, but it's kind of described as if it's suspended, like it's waiting to get back to the actual chord. Like you can hear, it wants to get back to, like, music is magic. I'm going to use the weird terms of it wants to, as if frequencies want to do something. But when you play a suspended thing, it sounds like, okay, that's the thing that's going to come before you get back to you resolve on the nice major chord. Same thing with second. Like, this sounds finished. This doesn't. Now that doesn't mean that's the only way they're used, and it's sort of a generalization. But when in a chord, instead of playing the major, you leave out the third into a second, or you do a fourth, that's a suspended fourth or a suspended second, and then the major. Now, if you do them all at the same time, it's horrible. And if you, again, general rule, if you have the fourth and the third at the same time, it sounds horrible because it's fighting over it. But as you play around with, so first of all, after you've done the exercises of learning the inversions of a chord, so you can look at a chord like a C major, then you can play around with, well, what notes kind of go along with that you can play around with. This is known as a major scale. Now, I'm not even going to get into scales. Like, one thing that most lessons do is learn your scales and play them 100 million times until you're bored out of your mind. I don't bother with that. You'll learn notes as you go along that tend to fit with the chords. There's also a bunch of different scales, because there's Lydian and Dorian, Ionian, Lydian. I forget all their names, and I forget what half of them are because I haven't, like, I've used them all, but I don't talk about them often enough to even remember which names go with which. So a normal major scale, I think that's called Ionian, is that. A Lydian is... sounds sort of spookier and weirder. So there are different notes that go with the chord depending on what else is in the song and where you just came from. For example, here's an E minor, just the notes in the chord. This would be the second, this would be the fourth. There's an E minor, the third, there's the minor third. And if from that, the second in the E minor is an F sharp. Notice if I play a natural F, natural just means there isn't a sharp. It sounds kind of weird. It's like a different spooky scale. But the more normal sounding major scale for E minor has an F sharp in it. And if you're playing that and you move to a C, the F sharp still sounds like it fits. Notice I'm hitting the F sharp. Whereas normally, that's the happy scale that goes with it. So the first thing to know about notes is that try anything and see what it sounds like. But you'll find that in certain contexts, certain notes are going to tend to fit and other ones are going to tend to sound horrendous. But you need to know the names of the second and the fourth. The third and the fifth are already in the chord. The root note, the third and the fifth are already in the chord. Then you have the second, the fourth. The sixth isn't used very often in most songs you'll hear. I think Elton John uses it a bunch. I use it pretty often because you can do cool things with it. It just kind of, it's weird enough that a lot of people just don't include that in the melodies. The seventh. So here's the octave of a C. The seventh can be a minor seventh or a major seventh. So here's a C major, right? But I'm adding this. So this is called C major seventh. And the sticking the seventh on the end just means I'm adding a seventh to the chord. You're not taking away any notes. You're just adding. I use sevenths a lot, minor sevenths and major sevenths. So here's a normal C major with just a C in the top. But if you move it down to the seventh, the major seventh, it has a weird spooky sound. So there are a bunch of chords that are major and minor, but with something added, such as a major seventh. Here's an A minor seventh. Notice that doesn't really belong in the chord. Here's A minor, and there's the next A. But if you add that, that's the seventh. Again, root note, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh. I like minor sevenths. Now, remember how I taught you to find chords and go up and down the keyboard, seeing all the inversions. You can do the same thing with chords that add other things, like a minor seventh. Like here's A minor seventh again. If you picture that in the next octave, it's right there. And then here. So if you do 4 notes at a time, and each time you're just doing the next inversion, and again, this is as much an eyeball practice as a finger practice, is seeing the pattern and seeing the same pattern in the next octave and seeing how they fit together. And seeing that, okay, if that's an A minor 7th and that's an A minor 7th, then I can play any combination of these notes, including this, which looks funny because 2 notes are right next to each other, which you don't ever get in a normal major or minor chord. But when you start throwing in 7ths and 2nds and stuff, you'll get notes right next to each other. Now, a lot of time, notes right next to each other do not sound good. But there are times when they do. Like, you can't just do a whole bunch of notes side by side and have it sound like anything other than barf. But you can have patterns where sometimes they have notes right next to each other. So if you picture the A minor in every octave, you can see all the combinations of all the patterns that fit into that, all the inversions. Here's an F major 7th. That's the 7th. Here's the F major. There's the octave. Right below it makes it the major 7th. So F major 7th, F major 7th again in the next octave. Notice we're still doing an F major, we're just sticking an extra note on top of it. But you can picture all the inversions. Incidentally, that's a good eyeball exercise and finger exercise. Oh, in fact, so I'll do this. If you watch the pattern, it's actually the same pattern in both. So we're going to start on A minor, hit an A with your left hand, just because it sounds cool to have a bass note. A minor, and then add the 7th, the G. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And then picture it up there, and then what I want you to do is go, if you have a damper pedal, hold down the damper pedal and all the notes will ring and it'll sound cool. Again, this is a finger exercise and an eyeball exercise because you have to see that pattern repeated here to know what to do. So you're picturing all these at once and you're just doing 4 at a time. Then you move him up an octave. Then you move him up an octave. Then you move him up an octave. Move the G up an octave. Now you're back to the original minor 7th, and then it just keeps going. So it's an exercise of eyeballs recognizing where the pattern goes, and an exercise of your fingers to see if you can get them to smoothly do the pattern. For a while you won't be able to. It will feel awkward because your brain isn't used to sending signals that smoothly and rapidly to different fingers, unless you're like a typist or play the guitar or something. It won't feel natural to begin with, but again, the only way to get there is make your brain do it over and over again until it becomes smooth. And so do this as an exercise, eyeball exercise and finger exercise, but it also sounds cool. Which makes the exercise more fun than Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Which is A in the bass, just hit an A because it sounds cool. You're doing the A minor 7th until you like run out of keyboard. Then do the same thing with an F major 7th, which is really just the same pattern moved down. and back. And you'll notice, like, it'll take a while before your eyeballs can do that, and it'll take a while before your fingers can do that. Once again, I'm going to emphasize for the billionth time, if it's uncomfortable and awkward and you're tripping over yourself, make yourself keep doing it, because you have to go through that process to be able to train your fingers and your eyes to see it. And if you make yourself keep doing it, you'll be surprised how quickly you can actually get to the point where it sounds really cool and sophisticated and like you know what you're doing. And then you can even do it two-handed. Okay, so there's an A minor seventh. Here's the same chord. Then I'm going to move my left hand to that one. Do the same chord an octave higher. So I'm really just doing this. But in each one, I'm going from the bottom up in the chord. And if you just practice until you can do it smoothly, it sounds really cool. Again, if you can hold the damper pedal down, without it, it sounds like this. Which is pretty cool. But if you can make it all ring, it sounds cooler. And you can go back and forth between the A, as it happens, A minor seventh and F major seventh go together well. They sound cool together, going back and forth, and they're both the same pattern. They're both all on the white notes, so it's fairly easy to play. So it's... Whoops, I missed. It's a little bit clumsy because I'm stepping around on one foot. Helps if you can do it sitting down where you're not... So you can use the damper pedal without having to balance on one foot, but whatever. Okay, so in a minor chord, there's still the root note, the third, and the fifth. This is still the second. This is still the fourth. In A minor, try just playing around. Hit the chord and try just playing around with the melody. Now, if you have a damper pedal, you don't want to hold it down the whole time you're doing a melody, because then all the notes add up. It starts to sound like a jumbled mess. That actually wasn't all that bad, but it can get jumbled. But try playing in A minor and just play around on the white notes. You'll notice that the F is the one that sounds weird. Notice that would be the sixth. Here's an A minor, that's the fifth. This would be the sixth. And it's kind of cool, it just kind of sounds weird. But with an A minor, if you literally play any white note you want, except for F, everything else will fit in really easily. Notice the only pattern I'm doing is white notes except for the Fs. F, F, F. See if you can, to start the thing of writing your own music, see if you can write a melody over A minor and F major that goes back and forth between the two. Now, when you're on the F major, then you're allowed to hit the F, because that's actually in an F major. It's the root note. And then you can do any of the white notes with the F major seventh or just F major. So see if you can do a thing where with your left hand you play A minor and an F and go back and forth between the two. See if you can make up a melody that sounds like something. Now you might accidentally find other people's melodies and go, hey, wait, that's how this thing goes. Like whether you're finding somebody else's or making up your own, play around, because the thing is, whether it's a guitar or a keyboard or a violin or anything else, you need to let your ear teach you. Like you can read from a book, all right, here are the rules, but you need your ear to tell you when something is good and when something is horrible. and play around and just see what it sounds like. It's sort of like, you know, a baby learning to talk. Like they start to notice, hey, I can make noises. Blah, 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 blah. They're not very controlled noises, but it's like, well, I can make something happen. And the more they focus, the more they have control and they know what it's going to sound like. And what, you know, they get to the point where they can say mama, they know how to make the movements that make the sound mama. Well, if you want to know how to make the movements that sound like, you have to play around until your ear knows what the notes sound like and knows what fits. And then you'll know how to do it. So I'm going to stop this particular lesson at just the homework of make up your first song. Simple little melody, doesn't have to be anything intricate. It can literally just be one note at a time in the right hand. Just play around, and I'll tell you as a cheat for this one, while you're on A minor, all the white notes except the F. By the way, feel free to break all the rules I ever tell you. I'm just telling you rules that'll make it easier to quickly find something that sounds half decent. So between A minor and F major, I'm just making it up as I go along. You'll get to the point where you can improvise, which is making up a melody as you go. Because you know the rules enough and know what it's going to sound like enough that you can just make it up. I'll finish with an example of that, but you have your homework, which is write a melody on A minor and F major going back and forth. Here's a sequence of, I forget how many billion years ago I wrote this. It's an 8-chord pattern. It's in A minor, but I'm going to do an ad lib. Don't bother trying to like figure out what the chords are or follow it or learn this or anything, but watch how I'll try to play the chords sometimes and then the wandering melody that goes in between. So you can just sort of see how a melody can wander around while chords are going on. Whoops, I don't remember my own. I literally don't remember. So you know, not that it matters, this is A minor, E minor, F, C, D minor, F, G, G twice, A minor, So play around with stuff. First, play around with A minor, F, because it's a really easy thing to go back and forth and find a melody. If you want extra credit, here's a super easy way to play a thing. E flat in the bass, which is the top of the two black notes together. You can play an octave of them down here, and literally anything on the black notes. Slightly Chinese, but that's a way to play around. It's just on the black notes with this and the bass. All right, so that's enough homework for now, and that will end this lesson.